The winter of 1882 had settled hard across the Montana Territory. Snow stretched over the hills like an endless white blanket, hiding old wagon trails and frozen creeks beneath its silent weight. The pine forest stood motionless beneath gray skies while a bitter wind carried loose flakes across the empty frontier. Few men traveled these mountains in January. Ethan Cole did. The 33-year-old rancher guided his chestnut gelding carefully through the deep snow, his sharp eyes following a fresh trail of wolf tracks. 2 calves had disappeared from his ranch during the past week, and Ethan intended to discover whether wolves, or thieves, were responsible. Unlike most cowboys, he rode without unnecessary noise. Years of living alone had taught him that the wilderness spoke quietly, and only quiet men ever heard it. The afternoon sun hung low behind thick clouds when something unexpected reached his ears. A scream. Not the cry of an animal. A woman. Ethan pulled hard on the reins. Another desperate scream echoed across the frozen valley. He urged his horse forward. Within moments the trees opened onto the banks of a wide river, its surface buried beneath layers of snow and ice. Near the center, a dark hole churned violently in the frozen sheet. A young woman struggled in the freezing water. Help! The icy current dragged at her shoulders as broken pieces of ice slammed against her body. Every attempt to climb onto the frozen surface caused it to crack beneath her weight. She was losing strength. Fast. Without wasting a second, Ethan threw himself from the saddle. He grabbed the long rescue rope tied behind his horse, wrapped one end around a sturdy pine tree, and crawled onto the cracking ice. "Don't fight the water," he shouted. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The woman barely nodded. Her lips had already turned blue. The ice groaned beneath Ethan's weight. One more crack split the river with a sound like thunder. Cold water swallowed one of his legs. Ignoring it, he stretched the rope toward her. "Take it." Her shaking fingers missed. Again. Then finally caught hold. Ethan planted his boots and pulled with everything he had. The current fought back. For one terrifying moment both of them slid toward the hole. Then the rope tightened. Slowly. Inch by inch. He dragged her onto solid ice before carrying her across the riverbank just as another section collapsed behind them. Both lay breathing heavily in the snow. The woman coughed violently, forcing river water from her lungs. Long dark hair clung to her pale face, and frightened green eyes slowly met Ethan's. "You," she whispered through trembling lips. "You saved me." Ethan simply nodded. "Can you stand?" She tried. Her legs failed instantly. Without another word, Ethan lifted her onto his horse and rode toward his ranch nearly 6 miles away. Night settled quietly over the valley. A fire burned inside Ethan's cabin while the rescued stranger slept beneath heavy wool blankets. The local doctor had come and gone, leaving only one warning. "She'll live, if the cold doesn't return before morning." Ethan placed another log onto the fire before stepping outside to check the horses. When he returned several minutes later, the cabin stood empty. The blankets lay scattered across the floor. His Winchester rifle. Gone. His saddlebag filled with nearly every dollar he owned. Gone. Even his horse had disappeared into the snowy darkness. Ethan stood silently in the doorway. No anger crossed his face. Only disappointment. Then something caught his eye beside the fireplace. A small silver locket. It had likely fallen from the young woman's coat during her hurried escape. Inside rested half of an old family photograph. A little girl smiling beside a woman whose face had been carefully cut away. Ethan closed the locket gently and slipped it into his coat pocket. Outside, fresh hoofprints disappeared into the endless snow. He watched them until they vanished into the white horizon. He had no way of knowing that 2 years later, fate would place that same woman before him once again, not on horseback, but standing in chains before a crowd of strangers. 2 years passed like drifting dust across the western frontier. Seasons changed. Snow gave way to spring, spring surrendered to scorching summers, and life on Ethan Cole's ranch settled into a quiet rhythm. The stolen horse was eventually replaced. The missing money was slowly earned back through years of honest work. Only one thing remained exactly where he had left it. The small silver locket. It rested inside a wooden drawer beside his bed, wrapped carefully in an old handkerchief. Every now and then, Ethan found himself opening it, staring at the faded half of a family photograph, wondering whether the frightened woman from the frozen river had ever found the life she had been running toward. He never expected to see her again. Late August brought Ethan to the frontier town of Dry Creek. The dusty streets buzzed with freight wagons, cattle drives, and miners spending fresh wages inside crowded saloons. Horses stood tied beneath wooden awnings while merchants shouted prices over the afternoon heat. Ethan had only come for supplies. Flour. Coffee. Fence wire. A new horseshoe hammer. As he stepped from the general store, a loud voice echoed across the square. Labor auction. Debt settlement. Last bidder takes the contract. He barely looked. Such auctions had become common throughout the territory. Families buried beneath impossible debts often sold years of labor just to survive another season. Ethan started walking toward the blacksmith. Then he heard a woman's voice. "You can tie my hands," she shouted, "but you won't make me bow my head." The words stopped him cold. Something about that voice reached through 2 forgotten years. He turned. Standing atop a rough wooden platform was a young woman with her wrists loosely bound by rope. Her dark hair had grown longer. Her face looked thinner than he remembered. A bruise darkened one cheek, and exhaustion shadowed her green eyes. Yet there was no mistaking her. Clara Bennett. The woman from the frozen river. She looked older now, but the same stubborn fire still burned behind her eyes. An auctioneer gripped her arm roughly. "This woman owes $130, he announced. Strong enough to cook, clean, sew, and work ranch land. A rancher in the crowd laughed. "Looks too stubborn." Another spat tobacco into the dirt. "Probably causes trouble." Clara glared at them. "I cause problems only for dishonest men." Several people laughed. Others looked annoyed. No one noticed Ethan stepping closer. "What happened?" he quietly asked an elderly shopkeeper beside him. The old man sighed. "Girl tried paying off her little brother's gambling debt." "He's still alive?" "Barely." "Parents?" "Dead years ago." "Any family left?" The old man shrugged. "Nobody willing to help." Ethan looked back toward the platform. Clara wasn't searching the crowd for sympathy. She was searching for escape. When her eyes finally landed on Ethan, every trace of color disappeared from her face. Recognition. Then fear. She knew exactly who he was. Her lips parted slightly. "You." The single word barely escaped. Ethan said nothing. The auctioneer raised his ledger. Opening bid. $130. A ranch owner near the front lifted his hand. $130. Another called out. $140. Clara lowered her head. She already knew how this ended. Then Ethan spoke. $150. The square fell silent. Heads turned immediately toward the quiet rancher. The auctioneer blinked. $150. Ethan nodded once. Paid in full. No one offered another bid. Most believed the stranger had lost his mind. Why spend every dollar on a woman with a criminal past? The auctioneer slammed his ledger shut. Sold. He quickly untied Clara's wrists before handing the contract to Ethan. The crowd slowly drifted away, still whispering among themselves. Clara rubbed the red marks left by the rope but refused to meet Ethan's eyes. Finally she spoke. "I suppose this is where you collect what I stole." Ethan looked at her quietly. "If I wanted revenge," he said calmly, "I would have left you in that river 2 years ago." She stared at him in stunned silence. He handed her a canteen of cool water. "You don't owe me your freedom," he said. "You've already paid enough." Clara's fingers trembled as she accepted the canteen. For the first time in years, someone had chosen mercy over revenge. And somehow, that frightened her far more than hatred ever could. Together, they mounted their horses and began the long ride toward Ethan's ranch, while the setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, Dry Creek disappeared beneath a cloud of dust. Ahead lay a future neither of them could yet imagine. Autumn slowly settled over the Montana hills. Golden leaves drifted across Ethan Cole's ranch while cool winds carried the scent of pine through the valleys. Nearly 4 months had passed since Clara arrived from Dry Creek. The ranch no longer felt unfamiliar. She knew which horse disliked strangers. She knew where the creek flooded after heavy rain. She even knew Ethan's quiet routines: coffee before sunrise, fence repairs every Thursday, and long rides across the pasture every evening before sunset. Yet one question still haunted her. Why had he forgiven her? He had never mentioned the stolen horse. Never asked for the missing money. Never reminded her that she had once betrayed the man who had saved her life. The silence weighed heavier than anger ever could. One chilly evening, an unfamiliar wagon rolled onto the ranch. 3 rough-looking men climbed down, their revolvers hanging low on worn leather belts. Leading them was a broad-shouldered outlaw with a scar running across his left cheek. Wade Bennett. Clara's uncle. The man who had raised her after her parents died. The man who had taught her that stealing was easier than trusting. His crooked smile appeared the moment he saw her. "Well," Wade laughed. "Looks like the little runaway found herself a rich rancher." Clara's face turned pale. "You need to leave. I came for what's mine." Ethan stepped onto the porch. "I don't remember inviting you." Wade looked Ethan up and down before chuckling. "I hear you've got yourself a thief living under your roof." Clara lowered her eyes. She expected Ethan to finally learn the truth. Instead, he answered calmly. "I already knew." Wade frowned. "You knew? Since the day we met?" The outlaw laughed loudly. "Then you're even more foolish than people say." His eyes drifted toward Clara. "Pack your things. We're leaving." Clara didn't move. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of him. No. The single word hung in the cold air. Wade's smile disappeared. "You belong with family. I belong where people tell the truth." The outlaw's hand slowly reached toward his revolver. Before he could draw, Ethan spoke quietly. "I wouldn't." Something in his voice made every ranch hand stop working. Silence spread across the yard. Then Wade pulled his gun. The shot shattered the afternoon. Ethan moved first. Years of frontier life had sharpened his instincts. His revolver cleared its holster in one smooth motion. A single shot struck Wade's weapon, sending it spinning into the dirt. The other outlaws froze as half a dozen ranch hands surrounded them with rifles. Within minutes, the county sheriff arrived from the neighboring ranch. One frightened outlaw surrendered immediately. Trying to save himself, he confessed everything. The robberies. The gambling scams. The stolen land deeds. And the murder committed years earlier to steal Clara's parents' ranch. The sheriff placed Wade in iron handcuffs. As the prisoners were led away, the old sheriff handed Ethan a weathered leather pouch recovered from their wagon. "You might want to see this." Inside lay several faded documents. Beneath them rested a folded map. And the missing half of the Silver family photograph. Clara stared in disbelief. Ethan quietly walked into the house. Moments later, he returned carrying the silver locket he had kept for 2 long years. Without speaking, he placed both halves of the photograph together. The torn edges matched perfectly. Her mother. Her father. And a little girl standing between them. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You kept this. For 2 years." Ethan nodded. "I figured someday its owner might come looking for it." She looked down at the complete photograph. For the first time since childhood, she saw her family exactly as they had once been. Not broken. Whole. Winter passed. When spring returned, green grass covered the hills once more, and wildflowers bloomed beside the creek. One evening, Clara found Ethan repairing an old fence beneath the fading sunset. She slipped the silver locket around her neck. "I spent my whole life running," she said softly. Ethan looked up. "And now?" She smiled through quiet tears. "Now I've finally found somewhere worth staying." Ethan returned the smile, small, genuine, and warm. Together they looked across the endless Montana Valley, where the setting sun painted the land in gold. Out on the frontier, homes were rarely built from wood alone. Sometimes they were built from forgiveness. And sometimes, the greatest treasure a person could ever find wasn't hidden beneath the earth. It was the courage to trust someone enough to finally call a place home.